just about to finish up Unit 1. This is Jolene, Business 210, Principles of Management. Unit 1 is chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've done our introductory chapter to kind of introduce the principles of management to you. We've done chapters 1, 2, and 3. So we've got one more chapter to do, and we'll be finished with Unit 1. You'll have your Unit 1 study guide. You'll have these videos where you watch the videos, you look at the study, you underline in the study guide everything, and you will be ready to take test number 1. And I think the other thing that you're going to be doing, or you have done, or will do in Unit number 1 is you have mini assignment number 1, which has to do with ethics and social responsibility, which is what we talked about in chapter 3. Okay, chapter 4 is talking about global management. Now, we've already talked about that a good bit in chapters 1, 2, and 3. We've alluded to the fact that management is global. Businesses are global. Big, huge businesses like Nike and Microsoft and McDonald's and Target, these businesses are global, but there are small businesses that are global too. Because with technology, I know Cartown in Monroe, West Road, they have, on their web page and everything, they sell cars by way of the internet, of course. And I was talking to one of the two owners of that business, Steve Taylor, several years ago, and he had just sold, or they had just sold a Mercedes they had to somebody in Germany. I just thought that was kind of funny that Germany is where Mercedes, that's where Mercedes first got going. That's where they were developed. That's where they were first incorporated. I just thought it was kind of funny, somebody from Germany online buying a car from Cartown. But what that says is business is worldwide now. It's global. Okay, and again, we've talked a decent amount about that already. Okay, now if you are a geography buff, if you are into geography, you are probably gasping for air. Wait a minute, I don't think that's where China's supposed to be. I think Europe looks a little weird. Okay, work with me, all right? I have limited space here and I have limited geography knowledge without a map. So what we have here is the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We've got China, and we've got Europe. Because we'll be using these when we talk about to kind of help us understand globalization. Okay. First of all, maybe I can find a no item in chapter 4. Remember, we had several no items in chapter 1. You had to know the definition of management, you had to know the skills that managers had to have, and you had to know the functions they perform. There may have been another one, but that's the ones that I remember. No no's in 2, no no's in 3, so let's get into chapter 4. Global management, he says, let's define what globalization is. We've already really done that. The trend of the world economy towards becoming a more interdependent system. Okay, let me read that again and make a comment. Globalization, the trend of the world economy towards becoming a more interdependent system. It isn't becoming a more, it has become. We have a world economy, and our nations, or all nations, are virtually interdependent and interdependent on other nations. Used to, in the 1960s and the 1970s, we really didn't care what happened in China. China was just another nation way away from us. It had a whole lot of population, a big population. And what we did in the United States did not affect China, and what China did not affect us. That's not true anymore. We are interdependent on each other as nations, because we have this globalization. International trade, international business going on. And as a result of that, what happens in Europe affects the United States. What happens in the United States affects China. What happens in Canada affects Australia. You get the idea. It's interdependent. So we are at globalization. Now, he talks about three, and I want you to be familiar with what globalization is. He talks about three important developments that have come about. I just want to glance at this. It says the rise of the global village and electronic commerce. Well, from a business point of view, we're one global village because of electronic commerce, internet, all that sort of thing. Number two, the world is becoming one market instead of many national ones. The world is a market. For Walmart, the world is a market. For other companies, the world is a market. The rise of both mega firms and internet-enabled mini firms worldwide. Two developments, the global village and electronic commerce, us becoming one large international market as opposed to national markets, and thirdly, mega firms. Now, we've got some humongous firms out there that are doing business worldwide, but because of technology and everything, we have some very small firms that are also doing business all over the world or in different parts of the world. And so he asks the question here, can you see yourself working overseas? Now, if we were in class, this is probably where I would ask you, if you had to go to another country to work, where would you go? You have to go. Where would you like to go? And I'll usually get a number of different answers on that. A number of folks will mention, they'll stay kind of close to home, Canada. A number of people like the idea of going to France. Australia is usually kind of popular. Sweden, Switzerland, get a few people there. Germany, that's pretty popular. Probably one or two others that folks mention a good bit. That's just some of course want to go to England. So there's and a few to China. So the point is, though, could you see yourself working in another nation, overseas? Well, with as many of these global businesses we have, it's certainly a possibility, isn't it? Might be something you want to do. Now, he talks about, he talked about these mega firms, these really big firms. We have a lot of multinational corporations. What are multinational corporations? They are corporations that are doing business in 2 or more nations. There's a lot of those now because our business has become global. A business with operations in several countries. And I put some down here on the list. We probably could have listed 2 or 3 pages of these. ExxonMobil, Walmart, Toyota, General Electric, General Motors, Ford, but there's many multinational corporations. And I think I'm going to do you a favor here. I think I'm going to make the definition of multinational corporation, excuse me, a no item. I want you to know what a multinational corporation is. Now, the reason I said I'm going to do you a favor is this. That's got to be the shortest definition that you'll ever have me ask you to do. A multinational corporation is a corporation or a business with operation in several countries. So I want you to know that because there's a number of those, and the trend is for more and more businesses to become multinational. Now let me tell you something, just so you'll know. If you say a multinational company or a multinational corporation is a company that does business in 1 or more nations, it's wrong. It's not in 1 or more. It's in several, more than 1. So make sure to get these easy points on this definition that you don't use the word 1 unless you say more than 1. It's a corporation that does business in multiple nations. All right. Also, not only do we have multinational corporations, but we have multinational organizations, like Red Cross, things like that as well. But I do want you to know what a multinational corporation is. I want you to be familiar with what globalization is. He says something down here at the bottom of this first page. You may deal with foreign customers or partners. You may deal with foreign suppliers. You may work for a foreign firm. You may work for a U.S. firm outside the United States. With all this globalization, it goes back to what we talked about for a few minutes. In your career in business, you're going to deal with a lot of folks in other nations because a lot of things are supplied from other nations and that type of thing. It's truly, truly global. Now, our author gets into something here. He wants to show you, hey, look, I'm an author and I know kind of cool words. And these are kind of like words that are kind of business educational words just to show that I'm smart. But it also is a good point. He says the successful international manager has to be geocentric. You do not want to be ethnocentric or polycentric. And I know you're thinking, I don't even want to hear those words. But I do want you to be familiar with it because it really is important. Here's what it's saying. Let's take you, and you are a manager for a United States firm in another nation. Okay, you've got a nice management job in another nation. And so what our author says is you need to be geocentric in your approach, not polycentric or ethnocentric. So what does that mean? Well, if you are ethnocentric, it says we know best. We're going to do it in this country the way we did it in the United States because we know best how to do it in the United States. That is being ethnocentric. You don't want to be ethnocentric. Polycentric is, well, we're going to do it the way y'all do it here because this is the way you do it. You want to be geocentric. How do you want it? Whatever the job is that you have, whether it's a production job, a sales job, a design job, whatever it is, whatever you're managing, whatever country you're in, how do you want to do it? Best. You want to do it in the best way. If the best way is the way it's been done, that's great. If the best way is the way you've done it previously in the United States, since you're from the United States, and you can tweak it that way, that's fine. Geocentric, what's best is what's effective regardless of the origin. Well, we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it this way because this is the way we did it in the United States. But what do you think your employees are going to say? You ain't in the United States. But if you say, let's try it this way because we found this to work before, in my previous experience. So all he's saying is, you want to be a geocentric manager. Do what's best, which is most effective. All right. Why do companies expand internationally? Why does Walmart go to other nations? Why does even small companies, why does Cartown sell to other people in other nations? McDonald's. Well, stop and think about it. Obviously, I have it on our handout here, but let's just think a few minutes. There are a number of reasons why businesses, well, what's the most apparent reason? Why would you start doing business in other nations? Customers. You got more customers. We got 320 million, if you're Nike, you got 320 million pairs of feet running in the United States, running around in the United States. That's good. Globally, you got over 2 billion. Wow, that's a lot more feet. So that would be one of the reasons you would do it. You might do it because of labor cost. You can do it cheaper. Let's look at some of the reasons he talks about here. Availability of supplies. Sometimes some of the supplies that you need are more available from other nations, and so you expand internationally by getting your supplies from another nation. Think about all the things that we get. If you take that vehicle that's made in America, you probably got a lot of parts in it that came from other nations. New markets, we talked about that. Lower labor cost. Profit, revenue minus expenses equals profit, back in Business 101. How can I increase my revenue? How can I increase my profit? I can increase my profit by either increasing my revenue, decreasing my expenses, or a combination of both. Does that make sense? So if I can get lower labor costs, labor is a big expense. So if I can get a lower labor cost, I can decrease my expenses. What does that do to my profit? Increases it. Accessibility to financial capital. Sometimes other nations will actually provide incentives for you to come there and operate. They want you in that nation. If you were with me back in Business 101, we talked about businesses create wealth by having a business, a thriving, ongoing business in a community like CenturyLink. It creates wealth in our community. So they will entice businesses to come. Avoidance of tariffs and import quotas. We're going to be talking about tariffs and import quotas in a few minutes. If you're in the United States and you're shipping something to Europe, there's a good chance that you're going to be paying a tariff or an import quota on it. And again, we'll get to what those are, although probably a lot of you already know. But if you're actually in Europe doing the business, you're not importing, you're actually doing the business in Europe, you avoid taxes and tariffs and import quotas. Okay. So there's a number of good reasons why people, and there's probably other reasons that people expand, but that's just some of the reasons that businesses expand internationally. I'd be familiar with some of those reasons why businesses expand internationally. Now he talks a little bit about how companies expand. Why do you expand? We talked about that. How do you do it? Well, one way that you can expand internationally is by simply having some of the things that some of the production that you do at your company, have it done in another nation. Or if you export your goods to another nation, that would be a way that you could do. That you would be involved in expanding internationally. What if you set up a business with another company, like a franchise? You go in business with somebody else in another country. That would be one way you could do it. Or you may open up your own business in another country. You build a building and you open it up. So he says there's a number of different ways that you can expand internationally. Which one is best? Well, whichever one works best for you. A lot of times what a business will do, they may start exporting a product to a particular nation. And that nation becomes a really good customer. And so instead of going through all the exporting where there may be tariffs and import quotas, you may actually set up an operation in that nation. That's called a wholly owned subsidiary. Okay, but now, barriers to international trade. There sometimes can be barriers to this trade stuff, some things that can hamper trade, and there's some reasons for it. So let's talk about those. There's something called trade protectionism, and I want you to be familiar with what trade protectionism is. Government regulation to limit the import of goods and services. All right. Let's look at this for a minute. You've got a company here that's producing a particular product. But that product is also being imported from another nation. And that product may be coming in from another nation cheaper than what the person in the United States can build it for or produce it for. And so the government may do some things to try to even the playing field between the United States company and a company in another nation. Does that kind of make sense? Let me give you an example. The shrimping industry, that sort of thing in the United States. Vietnam and other nations, they also produce shrimp. Well, if too much cheaper shrimp is imported into the United States, it could devastate our shrimping industry, especially along the Gulf Coast. So our government may do some things to try to protect the shrimpers in the Gulf Coast, in Louisiana, from these people that are importing it from other nations. See the idea? Okay. All right, so that's called trade protectionism, trying to protect certain companies from international trade. There's three ways that you can do, well really there's two and there's a third one, but it's kind of for a different reason. There's three ways that you can, that businesses, government uses to take care of trade protectionism or to utilize trade protectionism. The first one you probably heard of are tariffs. What are tariffs? Tariffs are taxes. They also call them customs duties. So if you are importing something's being imported from Europe, if they put a tariff on it, if the United States puts a tariff on it, it's also called a customs duty. It's a tax. And so if they put a tariff on products coming from Europe, what's that going to do to the cost of that product? It's going to increase it, isn't it? Because this company is going to have to charge more for that product to pay that tariff. That makes this product that's being imported go up. Kind of evens the playing field maybe with a company in the United States because of the labor rates and wages and things that were paid in the United States. Kind of puts these people at a disadvantage. So this kind of helps level the playing field by increasing the cost of this product. That's a tariff. A second thing that can be done is something called an import quota. I'll just use China because I happen to have them here. What's a quota? It's a limitation. We're not going to put a tax on this product, but you can only import into the United States so many. Once you've imported that many for a year, then you can't import any more until the next year. It's a limitation on the amount. So an import quota limiting what can be brought in, or putting a tax on something that we brought in, that's two ways that you can utilize trade protectionism, say to protect businesses doing business in the United States. You don't want to lose them. The third one is something embargo. Anybody know what an embargo is? What do you do when you do an embargo? You cut off trade entirely. You don't do business with them all. No importing, no exporting. The idea behind that, it's not so much to protect businesses. It's not used for that nearly as much as it's used for political reasons. We don't want to do a bit. North Korea is a communistic country. North Korea is a country that we don't like. They don't like us. They could be a threat to us. We don't want to do anything to be helpful to them. So we have an embargo. I'm not sure where. Korea's over here somewhere, North Korea, okay? We have an embargo that says we don't do business with them. And it's not primarily to protect businesses in the United States as it is simply for political reasons. We don't want to have dealings with this nation. We don't believe in this nation. We don't believe in the way this nation works. All right, does that make sense? So those are three things that are trade protectionism type thing. Tariffs, import quotas, and embargoes. And I'd be familiar with those three. Now let me point something out. I've been doing all this way. I've been putting quotas on stuff coming into the United States. I've been putting tariffs on stuff that's coming into the United States, and I've been doing an embargo as far as the United States. And I made that statement. Part of the reason we do this, or the main reason we do it, especially these two, is to protect businesses in the United States. Okay. Well, I have a great idea. Why don't we just put high quotas and high tariffs on everybody, take that money that we get from those high tariffs and help pay the debt down, and it'll all work great. We'll put big old tough quotas on all these people, and we'll put high tariffs on these people and all this stuff, and it'll really help our nation. Why can't you just go crazy with that? Got that figured out? If we can do it to them, they can do it to us. So if we're putting all this stuff on people that are importing into us, what if other nations are putting these same things on stuff that we're exporting to them? Who'd probably get hurt worse? We actually import more stuff than we export. So the point I'm making is this: is it okay to use a tariff? Is it okay to use a quota? Yes, but selectively. You can't go crazy with it as a nation, because other nations can do the same thing. You want to use it in those instances where you really need to be helpful to producers within the United States. Be selective with it. It's all got to be a balance. Because remember, they can do to us what we do to them. I'll mention one thing. This is free, not text, not for test, not testing. Our present administration in Washington felt like that we had a very unfair trade agreement with China. That the trade agreement that the United States had with China favored China. And so we wanted to get China back to the bargaining table to kind of renegotiate our trade agreement. Well, China didn't particularly want to go back to the bargaining table. So we started putting really high tariffs on things being imported from China. And China said, we're going to do the same thing to you. And boy, they got pretty hot at it there. And they were putting billions of dollars worth of tariffs on everything. And it got a lot of people upset, rightly so. But our administration said, what we're doing, we're trying to get these people back to the bargaining table. And this is a tool we're using. So the same thing, so what happened there was, actually we did go back to the bargaining table with China, and we have signed a couple of much better trade agreements with China. So we kind of use the tariff for a short-term effect of getting them back to the bargaining table. We have something else that we're going to mention in a minute. The Canada, the United States, and Mexico, we have a trade agreement among our three nations to make trade be very free among our three nations. And that trade agreement is called Nafta, or was called N-A-F-T-A, the North American Free Trade Agreement, among our three nations. Our administration in Washington felt like that Canada and Mexico got the better end of that trade agreement. So we started putting significant increased tariffs on Canada and Mexico, primarily for the reason to get them back to the bargaining table and work out a better trade agreement for the United States. As a result of those tariffs and everything, Canada and Mexico and the United States have now worked out a new trade agreement that is more advantageous to the United States. It puts it on more of a level playing field. Okay. It used to be, I'll probably mention in a minute, I want you to know I want you to be familiar with what Nafta is, North American Free Trade Agreement. That's just a trade agreement among our three nations. But Nafta has been revised in the last year. Still have it, just more favorable to the United States. All right. With all this international trade going on, do you think there could ever be a dispute? You think anybody ever may say, wait, you're not treating us right. You're doing something wrong. Well, there's an organization called the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And here's the deal. If you are a nation and you want to trade internationally, and most nations do, well, the best thing for you to do as a nation is to join the World Trade Organization, the WTO. I have it down here. They monitor and enforce, one of the things they do is monitor and enforce trade agreements. There's about 155 nations that are a member of the WTO. And the WTO spells out the way international trade should be done. It spells out the rights and the wrongs, and you've got to abide within international law on this. And so if a company or if a nation does not abide by the international trade agreement regulations, then the WTO, they mediate that and work it out. Now let me say a couple of things about that and make sure you understand it. Well, let's say I'm a nation over here and I say, well, shoot, I want to do it my own way. I don't want somebody else setting down the regulations on how I'm going to do trade. I want to do my own deal. Well, I'm not joining the World Trade Organization. You can do your own deal, but here's the thing: most nations are not going to trade with you if you're not a member of the WTO, because what you're really saying is, I don't want to play by fair rules. It's kind of like the good housekeeping seal of approval. If you want to do international trade, you got to abide by fair rules and regulations, and that's the WTO. So I want you to be familiar with the WTO. They monitor and enforce trade agreements. In case there's some sort of dispute among nations, they can go in and monitor and enforce that. Okay. Last couple of things in Chapter 4. Major trading blocks. We've already talked about that a little bit. We have one trading bloc where three nations have gotten together to do trade: the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and that was called Nafta. It's been revised. Okay, let's think about something here. Let's say that you are Spain. Now again, if you're a geology buff, take a breath, it's okay. I just picked a block. If you wanted to do trade with the United States, here we are. Do you have much clout? Not really. Spain is kind of small. The United States is kind of big. And so it's going to be hard for you to have much going for you in trying to come up with a trade agreement. But what if all the nations in Europe, about 21, 22, 23 of those nations, what if they all got together for trading purposes and said, here's what we're going to do. As our group of nations, the nations in Europe, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have virtually no tariffs among our nations. We're going to have very few quotas among our nations. And when it comes to us coming up with trade agreement with other nations, we're going to work as a bloc. We're not going to do it individually. We're going to do it as a bloc of nations. We'll have and this, by the way, I think you probably know if you're into this at all, this is called the European Union. It's a bloc of nations in Europe who have joined together for trading purposes. Now that doesn't mean their nations have joined together as far as, politics and everything, but for trading purposes they've drawn together. Now the European Union has done something even more. They've come up with a common currency. You know what that's called? If you said the euro, you're right. So when a bloc of nations gets together for trading purposes, what they normally do is they normally eliminate or greatly reduce any kind of tariffs and quotas among their nations, and they come up with trade agreements with other nations as a bloc. The European Union will negotiate a trade agreement with China or a trade agreement with. Did you get the idea? So that's called a bloc of nations. Sometimes the United States or other nations want to give special treatment to a country. It could be for political reasons. It could be that that country is allowing us to have an air base there, or you know, something else that that country is doing in particular, and that we want to establish an even better relationship. You could have something that's called a most favored nation trading status. Describes a condition in which a country grants other countries favorable trading treatment, such as a reduction of import duties or taxes. So sometimes, let's use the United States, we may do things special for certain nations, give them what's called most favored nation trading status, because we want to form a stronger relationship with them. So let's look at this chapter, and then let me kind of clean up here. Globalization, we're there. We are global as far as business is concerned. Business is global. We are interdependent on each other for commerce and everything. So we want to know what globalization is. We want to be familiar with what globalization is. We want to know what a multinational corporation is, because many, many companies are multinational. If you happen to end up being a manager in a foreign nation, then you want to be a geocentric manager. You don't want to be ethnocentric, do what you did in your home country. You don't want to be polycentric, which means we just go ahead and do what they do in the nation that I'm in. You want to be geocentric. You want to make sure that you're doing what's best, what's most effective, regardless of where it comes from. Why do companies expand? And that we want to be familiar with those terms. Why do companies expand internationally? We talked about that. Availability of supplies, increased market, lower labor cost. I'd be familiar with some of the reasons why companies expand internationally. There are certain barriers to international trade, and there's reason for those barriers. I'd be familiar with what trade protectionism is, and I'd be familiar with tariffs, import quotas, and embargoes. Remember that with all this international trade, you could have some disputes. Who kind of mediates these disputes and this sort of thing? The World Trade Organization. Sometimes nations get together for trading purposes, just like the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It makes trade among our three nations very, very free and very, very easy. Those are what's called major trading blocs, and we talked about those. And then I would be familiar with what the most favored nation trading status is. The last couple of things in chapter 4 that I want us to be familiar with is this. He talks about the importance of national culture. Remember when we talked about ethics, we said the ethics in this nation may be different than the ethics in this nation. It may be different than ethics in this nation or this nation. And the ethics in different cultures, there are different ethics. So I want you to be familiar with what national culture or what culture is. Because culture has a lot to do with how you're going to conduct trade with, business with other nations. Culture is a shared set of beliefs, values, knowledge, and patterns of behavior common to a group of people. Even within the United States, we have an overall culture, but in some parts of the United States, we have some subcultures that blend together to make our national culture. Okay? So I just want you to be familiar that all nations have a particular culture. They're a set of beliefs, values, knowledge, and patterns of behavior. Does every nation have the same set of beliefs, values, knowledge, and patterns of behavior? The answer is no. And that's why ethics are different in different nations. So I would be familiar with what national culture is. He talks a little bit about some cultural variations. Well, what are some specific cultural variations that we have? Language. Think of all the different languages in the world. And I'm still trying to learn English. So when you are communicating with folks in other nations, sometimes to change English into their particular language, you have to be careful how you say it. interpersonal space, how you do business in different nations. You know, we like to do business at 3 or 4 feet. If we were in a classroom and I got more than if I got closer than 3 feet to you, you'd start being uncomfortable. If this was your head right here and I got right here, you'd be real uncomfortable with me. And I'd be real uncomfortable with you, because we like space. In other nations, in some Arabic nations, they like to get within 6 inches or 12 inches of each other to conduct business. Just different variations. But you have to be aware of those things when you're doing international business. Of course, obviously different religions. The Christian religion, the Muslim religion, the different religions bring about different beliefs and that type of thing. Okay. The last thing I want you to be familiar with here is you may become an expatriate. Hey, Sam's an expatriate. What in the world does that mean? An expatriate is people living or working in a foreign country. When they wrote this book, there was about 300,000 expatriates. I'm sure that's closer to 500,000 now. And that is, expatriates are simply people that are working in a foreign country. People living or working in a foreign country are expatriates. And that pretty much, I think, takes care of Chapter 4 about global management. We had really talked, now some of it like imports, quotas, and things like that, we had not talked about in the first 3 chapters. But this idea of global management and everything, we had already talked about that earlier, knowing that business is global. That takes care of Chapter 4. That takes care of the 4 chapters that you have. Now that you've finished this chapter and you're reviewing your study notes, you've underlined stuff that are no's and stuff that are be familiar with. You've studied that stuff. You've listened to all these wonderful videos. Then you'll be ready to take test number 1. And you'll have until, I think, a Sunday the 20th, I think. Don't hold me to that. But now, you could, because you could do like I would do. If we go back and look, we may have I think it's Sunday the 20th, and when you go into Canvas, you get ready to take your test. I mean, it'll show you the date that test has to be completed. All right, Unit 1 we have finished. Good luck on test number 1. I think you'll do well. You've got all the stuff that you need to do a really good job with it. I'm going to end this with the loud noise, so Professor Pierce, my executive producer, knows that I am done. And then it'll probably be a while before I see you when you click on for Chapter 5, but I'll probably go back in a few minutes and do Chapter 5. Thank you. See you in Unit 2.